The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, crackling through the quantum communication arrays that humanity had built across the outer rim of known space. Admiral Sarah Chen was drinking her third cup of coffee in the command center of Luna Station when the transmission broke through every emergency channel simultaneously. The voice that emerged from the speakers was alien, but the universal translator caught the desperation bleeding through every syllable. "This is Ambassador Kethvar of the Zalani Collective. We are sending this message to any species capable of receiving it. Our worlds are dying. Our people are being harvested like crops. We have tried to resist, but we are failing. If there is anyone out there who values life, who understands what it means to fight for survival, please, we beg you for help." The transmission cut to static, then looped again and again. Chen set down her coffee cup, her hands steady despite the weight of what she had just heard. Around her, the communication technicians worked frantically to trace the signal's origin while xenobiologists pulled up everything they knew about the Zalani from the galactic database. The Zalani were a peaceful species, known throughout the galaxy for their artistic achievements and philosophical contributions to interspecies dialogue. They had been among the first to welcome humanity when Earth finally achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Their homeworld, Zelen Prime, was famous for its floating crystal cities and bioluminescent forests that painted the night sky in colors that had no names in any human language. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Rodriguez from the scanning station, "we're picking up massive energy signatures from the Zalani sector. Multiple fleet movements, and they're not Zalani ships." Chen nodded grimly. She had heard rumors from the outer territories, whispers of something dark moving through the galaxy's edge. Ships that appeared without warning, planets that went silent overnight, entire civilizations that simply vanished from the galactic communication network. "Get me the Security Council," she ordered. "Priority Alpha authorization. Tell them we have a Code 7 situation." Within hours, representatives from Earth, Mars, the Titan colonies, and the deep space mining stations were assembled in the holographic conference chamber. The debate was immediate and fierce. "We barely know these aliens," argued Director Morrison from the Mars Collective. "Why should we risk human lives for them?" "Because it's the right thing to do," replied Senator Williams from Earth. "The Zalani helped us when we were new to the galactic community. They shared their medical knowledge, their agricultural techniques. Thousands of human lives have been saved because of their generosity." "That's not the point," Morrison shot back. "We have no idea what we're dealing with. For all we know, this could be some kind of trap." Chen had heard enough. She stood, and the room fell silent. As the ranking military officer present, her words carried weight that went beyond mere protocol. "6 months ago," she began, "we intercepted a distress signal from the Corvani system. By the time our scouts arrived, there was nothing left but debris fields and empty planets. 3 months ago, the same thing happened to the Arcturus settlement. Last month, the Vegan trading posts went dark." She activated the holographic display, showing a star map with red markers indicating the lost worlds. "Whatever's doing this is moving in a pattern. They're not random attacks. Someone or something is systematically wiping out entire civilizations, and they're getting closer to human space." The room erupted in concerned murmurs. Chen continued, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "The Zalani aren't just asking for help because they're desperate. They're warning us. If we don't act now, if we don't stop whatever this is, we'll be next." The vote was close, but humanity chose to act. Within 72 hours, the largest military fleet in human history was assembled. 200 ships, from massive dreadnoughts bristling with plasma cannons to small, fast corvettes designed for hit-and-run tactics. The fleet represented the combined might of every human faction, setting aside decades of political differences in the face of an unknown threat. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiance as the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace. The ship was humanity's newest and most advanced vessel, equipped with experimental shielding technology and weapons that could crack the crust of a small moon. But as she looked out at the assembled fleet, she wondered if it would be enough. "All ships report ready for jump," announced the navigation officer. "Signal the fleet," Chen ordered. "Today, we answer the call of those who cannot defend themselves. Today, we show the galaxy what humanity stands for. All ships, initiate hyperspace jump." The stars stretched into lines of light as the fleet vanished into the swirling vortex of hyperspace, racing toward a destiny none of them could imagine. The journey to Zalani space took 18 hours through the hyperspace corridors. During that time, Chen's intelligence teams worked around the clock to analyze every piece of data they could find about the mysterious attackers. What they discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The enemy called themselves the Devourers, and they lived up to their name in the most literal sense possible. They were an ancient race that had survived by consuming other civilizations, not just destroying them, but actually feeding on their life force, their knowledge, their very essence. They traveled in massive biomechanical ships that looked more like living creatures than constructed vessels, and they left nothing behind but empty husks of worlds stripped bare of all life. "Their technology is unlike anything we've encountered," reported Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, the fleet's chief xenobiologist. "Our analysts believe they've been doing this for thousands of years, possibly longer. They're not just conquerors, Admiral. They're parasites on a galactic scale." When the fleet finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zalani system, what they found confirmed their worst fears. The outer planets were dark, their surfaces scarred and lifeless. Massive ships, each one the size of a small city, hung in orbit around the remaining inhabited worlds like metallic vultures. "Dear God," whispered the tactical officer, "there must be hundreds of them." Chen studied the tactical display with growing horror. The Devourer fleet was enormous, dwarfing anything in human military history. Each ship pulsed with an organic rhythm, as if breathing, and energy readings showed power levels that defied conventional physics. "Incoming transmission," announced the communications officer. "It's from Xenon Prime." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the desperate face of Ambassador Kethvar. The alien's normally silver skin had taken on a gray pallor, and his large, expressive eyes were filled with a mixture of hope and despair. "Human fleet, you came," he breathed. We did not dare to hope. Our defense forces were destroyed in the first attack. Our cities are under siege. They're taking our people, Admiral Chen. They're harvesting them like livestock." Chen's jaw tightened. "How much time do you have, Ambassador?" "Hours, perhaps less. They've broken through the planetary shields. Our evacuation sites are failing. Please, if you're going to act, it must be now." The transmission cut out as explosions lit up the surface of Xenon Prime like deadly fireworks. Chen turned to face her command crew, seeing her own determination reflected in their faces. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "All ships, battle stations, we're going in." "Admiral," called out Captain Torres from the tactical station, "the enemy outnumbers us at least 3-1. Their ships are larger, and we have no idea what kind of weapons they're carrying." Chen smiled grimly. "Then we'll have to be smarter, faster, and more stubborn than they are. Deploy the fleet in attack pattern Delta. Heavy ships take point, corvettes and destroyers provide flanking support, and signal all ships to arm their experimental weapons. Today, we find out what humanity is really capable of." As the human fleet accelerated toward the Devourer armada, the enemy ships began to move with an eerie, synchronized grace. They turned to face the approaching humans like a pack of predators sensing new prey. Energy readings spiked as unknown weapons systems powered up, and the space between the two fleets crackled with tension. "Incoming transmission from the lead Devourer ship. reported communications. "Put it through," Chen ordered. The figure that appeared on the holographic display was a nightmare-given form. The Devourer commander was a writhing mass of organic technology, part creature, part machine, with multiple eyes that glowed with malevolent intelligence. When it spoke, its voice was a harmony of whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Foolish young species," it hissed. "You do not understand what you face. We have consumed 1,000 civilizations. We have drunk the life essence of entire star systems. You are nothing but another meal to sustain our eternal hunger." Chen stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Fleet. You will withdraw from this system immediately and release all captives, or we will stop you." The creature's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass. "Stop us? You are children playing with toys. Your species has barely crawled out of its birth system. What could you possibly do against the eternal hunger?" "You're about to find out," Chen replied, cutting the transmission. She turned to her crew. "All ships, attack formation. Target their largest vessels first. Remember, we're not just fighting for the Zalani today. We're fighting for every species that's ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of something better." The first human plasma torpedoes lit up the darkness of space like miniature suns, streaking toward the Devourer fleet with deadly purpose. The battle for Zelan Prime had begun, and with it, humanity's first real test on the galactic stage. The first exchange of fire between the human fleet and the Devourers shattered the silence of space with violence that painted the void in brilliant colors of destruction. Plasma torpedoes from the human ships met energy beams of sickly green light that seemed to twist reality itself as they passed through space. Admiral Chen gripped the command rail as the Defiance shuddered under the impact of enemy fire. The Devourer weapons were unlike anything in human military databases. Instead of simple energy or kinetic damage, they seemed to drain the very life from whatever they touched. Hull plating aged decades in seconds, metal became brittle and cracked, and even the ship's power systems fluctuated as if the energy itself was being consumed. "Shields down to 70% and falling," reported the tactical officer. "Admiral, their weapons are somehow draining our ship's energy reserves directly." "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Chen commanded into her communicator. "Don't let them maintain a lock on you. Keep moving. Keep firing." The human fleet scattered into smaller groups, using their superior speed and maneuverability to stay ahead of the massive Devourer bioships. The strategy worked initially, allowing the human vessels to land several successful strikes against the alien fleet. But as the battle progressed, it became clear that the Devourers were adapting to human tactics with frightening speed. Captain Maria Santos, commanding the destroyer Fury, watched in horror as one of the Devourer ships actually began to change shape in response to her ship's attack pattern. What had been a roughly cylindrical vessel suddenly sprouted organic-looking projections that tracked her movements with predatory intelligence. "This is impossible," she muttered, then keyed her communicator. "Admiral, these things are learning from our attacks. They're literally evolving in real time." Chen processed this information while watching the tactical display. The human fleet had managed to destroy 3 of the smaller Devourer vessels, but at the cost of 5 human ships. Worse, the enemy was beginning to coordinate their efforts in ways that suggested a hive-mind intelligence. "All ships, implement Protocol 7, she ordered. "Random attack patterns, no repetition of tactics. If they learn from our actions, we need to become unpredictable." On the surface of Zelan Prime, the battle raged with equal ferocity. Devourer ground forces had broken through the planetary defenses and were systematically harvesting the population. The aliens used terrifying biomechanical constructs that moved like living tanks, their organic components feeding on fallen Zalani, while their mechanical parts processed the bodies into some kind of energy substance. Ambassador Kethvar had taken refuge in the underground bunkers beneath the capital city, coordinating the evacuation efforts while watching his beautiful world die around him. The crystal spires that had taken centuries to grow were being dissolved by devourer harvesting equipment, their stored life energy feeding the invaders' endless hunger. "Human Admiral," he called through the quantum communicator, "our people are trapped in the northern continent. The evacuation ships cannot reach them through the devourer blockade. If there is any way—" Chen looked at the tactical display, calculating rapidly. Breaking through the orbital blockade to reach the surface would require a significant portion of her fleet, leaving them vulnerable to the main devourer force. But allowing an entire continent of civilians to be harvested was unthinkable. "Captain Torres," she ordered, "take the 3rd Squadron and escort our transport ships to the northern continent. Get those people out." "Admiral, that will leave us outnumbered 4-1 up here," Torres protested. "I know the math, Captain. Do it anyway." As the human ships dove toward the planet's surface, the main battle continued to rage in orbit. The Devourers had brought their largest ships into the fight, vessels so massive they created their own gravitational fields. One of them, easily the size of a small moon, began to emit a low-frequency pulse that seemed to interfere with human navigation systems. Dr. Reeves, monitoring the battle from the Defiance's science station, suddenly called out in alarm. "Admiral, I'm reading massive energy buildup from that command ship. Whatever they're charging, it's drawing power from their entire fleet." Chen studied the readings, her blood running cold as she realized what was happening. "They're preparing to crack the planet. All ships, emergency acceleration. We have to stop them before—" The Devourer's superweapon fired before she could finish the sentence. A beam of pure entropy lanced down from the command ship toward Zealand Prime's surface, but instead of hitting the planet directly, it struck the moon that orbited overhead. In seconds, the celestial body simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, but consumed, its matter and energy feeding back into the Devourer fleet. The message was clear: surrender or watch your world die. "They want us to break," Chen said quietly. "They want us to run so they can finish their harvest in peace." Around her, the bridge crew waited for orders. They had all seen the impossible weapon that had just erased a moon from existence. They knew they were facing technology that was thousands of years more advanced than anything humanity possessed. But they also knew their admiral, and they could see the stubborn determination in her eyes that had made her a legend in human military circles. "Signal all ships," Chen commanded. "Prepare for Operation Broken Arrow." The communications officer looked up in surprise. "Ma'am, Broken Arrow protocols are for when conventional weapons won't work and desperate times call for desperate measures," Chen finished. "Signal Earth Command. Tell them we're implementing the Prometheus protocols." Throughout the human fleet, ships began powering up experimental weapons that had never been tested in actual combat. Humanity's greatest scientists had worked for decades on theoretical weapons based on the cutting edge of physics and quantum mechanics. Most had been deemed too dangerous or unpredictable for practical use. Today they would find out if desperate times could make the impossible necessary. The first ship to implement the new protocols was the heavy cruiser Achilles. Captain Jackson had volunteered his vessel to test the experimental quantum disruptor, a weapon that theoretically could tear holes in space-time itself. As the device powered up, space around the Achilles began to shimmer and distort. "Firing quantum disruptor," Jackson reported calmly, as if he weren't about to use a weapon that might accidentally create a black hole. The beam that emerged from the Achilles looked like a crack in reality itself, a line of absolute darkness that seemed to cut through space rather than travel through it. When it struck the nearest Devourer ship, the results were immediate and devastating. The alien vessel didn't explode or burn. It simply folded in on itself and vanished, as if it had never existed at all. The effect on the Devourer fleet was immediate. For the first time since the battle began, their coordinated movements faltered. The hive mind intelligence that controlled them had just witnessed something that violated their understanding of what was possible. "It worked," Jackson reported, his voice filled with amazement. The quantum disruptor actually worked. But even as he spoke, alarms began sounding throughout his ship. The experimental weapon had damaged the Achilles quantum stabilizers, and reality was beginning to fray around the vessel. Space-time distortions flickered across the hull as the ship struggled to maintain its existence in normal space. "All crew to emergency pods," Jackson ordered without hesitation. "Ship's becoming unstable. Quantum cascade failure imminent." Chen watched on the tactical display as the crew of the Achilles evacuated their dying ship. The vessel continued to fire its conventional weapons, even as its hull began to phase in and out of reality, buying precious seconds for the evacuation pods to reach safety. "Captain Jackson was a good man," she said quietly, as the Achilles finally vanished in a cascade of quantum energy that took 2 more Devourer ships with it. "Signal all ships equipped with Prometheus weapons. You're authorized to fire at will." What followed was unlike any battle in recorded history. Human ships unleashed weapons that bent the laws of physics, while the Devourers responded with biotechnology that seemed to be alive and hungry. The destroyer Nemesis fired gravitational pulse cannons that created miniature black holes, consuming Devourer vessels, but also threatening to destabilize the entire star system. The frigate Icarus used temporal displacement missiles that aged enemy ships to death in seconds, but the feedback damaged the Icarus's own timeline, creating temporal echoes of the ship that flickered in and out of existence. On the planet's surface, Captain Torres and his rescue squadron had reached the northern continent and begun evacuating the trapped Zelani civilians. But the operation was taking longer than expected, and Devourer ground forces were closing in on their position. "Admiral, we've got 10,000 civilians aboard, but there are still 50,000 people down here," Torres reported. "The Devourers are 3 hours out from our position. We need more time." Chen looked at the tactical display, calculating quickly. The main battle in orbit was reaching a critical point. Both fleets had taken massive casualties, but the Devourers still had their command ship and its planet-killing weapon. If she detached more ships to help with the evacuation, they might not have enough firepower to stop the superweapon from firing again. "How long do you need, Captain?" 12 hours minimum. These people are scattered across an entire continent. We're moving as fast as we can." 12 hours. Chen knew they didn't have 12 hours. The Devourer command ship was already beginning to charge its main weapon again, preparing to eliminate the human fleet and finish their harvest of Zealand Prime. But as she studied the tactical display, an idea began to form in her mind. It was insane, suicidal, and had almost no chance of success. In other words, it was exactly the kind of plan that might work against an enemy that thought it had already won. "All ships. New target priority," she announced. "We're taking the fight directly to their command ship." "Admiral, that thing is the size of a small moon," protested her tactical officer. "Our weapons barely scratched it in the previous engagements." Chen smiled grimly. "Then we'll have to get creative. Signal the fleet. We're going to ram that thing." The silence on the bridge was deafening. Finally, the navigation officer spoke up. "Ma'am, ramming a ship that size would be suicide. Our entire fleet wouldn't even dent its hull." "Not with kinetic force alone," Chen agreed. "But what if we ram it while simultaneously detonating every Prometheus weapon we have left? What if we turn our entire fleet into one massive quantum bomb?" The implications of what she was suggesting sank in slowly. They would sacrifice every human ship in the fleet, along with their crews, for the chance to eliminate the Devourer command ship and give the evacuation operation the time it needed to save the Zalani civilians. "Admiral," called the communications officer. "Incoming message from Captain Torres on the surface. Put him through." Torres's face appeared on the holographic display, streaked with sweat and illuminated by the fires of a dying world. "Admiral, I'm monitoring your tactical communications. You can't sacrifice the entire fleet for us. There has to be another way." Chen shook her head. "The numbers don't work any other way, Captain. But this isn't just about saving the Zalani. If we don't stop these Devourers here, they'll move on to human space next. Every world in the galaxy will face the same fate as Zalan Prime." She paused, looking around at her bridge crew. They were young, most of them, barely out of the academy. They had signed up to explore the stars and protect humanity, not to die in a suicide mission against alien horrors. But she could see in their faces that they understood what was at stake. "All ships, you have your orders. Anyone who wants to evacuate to the planet's surface has 60 seconds to transfer to a shuttle. No questions asked, no judgment rendered." The 60 seconds passed in tense silence. Not a single member of any crew requested evacuation. When Chen's communications officer reported that all ships remained at full strength, she felt a surge of pride that almost overwhelmed her. "Signal all vessels," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. "Today we answer the question of what humanity is willing to sacrifice to protect the innocent. Today we show the galaxy that some things are worth dying for." The human fleet began its final charge toward the Devourer command ship, every remaining vessel pushing their engines beyond safe parameters. Behind them, on the surface of Zealand Prime, the evacuation continued as Captain Torres and his people worked frantically to save as many lives as possible before the end came. The final charge of the human fleet toward the Devourer command ship became the stuff of legends that would be told across the galaxy for centuries to come. 67 vessels, their hulls scarred by battle and their crews pushed beyond the limits of endurance, accelerated toward a biomechanical monstrosity that dwarfed them like minnows approaching a whale. Admiral Chen stood at the center of the Defiance's bridge, watching the massive enemy ship grow larger on the tactical display. The Devourer command vessel was a nightmare of organic curves and metallic spines, its surface crawling with smaller parasitic ships that fed energy back to the main structure. As the human fleet approached, defensive weapons began tracking them, biomechanical turrets that moved with predatory grace. "All ships, maintain formation," Chen commanded. "Don't break off until the last possible second. We need to get close enough for maximum effect." The Devourer weapons opened fire with streams of entropy beams that aged and corroded everything they touched. The frigate Melbourne took a direct hit and simply disintegrated, its hull crumbling to dust in seconds. The heavy cruiser Titan lost its forward armor plating, exposing its internal structure to the vacuum of space, but continued its charge even as atmosphere vented from its wounds. Dr. Reeves, still at her science station despite the chaos around her, called out over the noise of battle damage alarms. "Admiral, I'm detecting massive quantum fluctuations from the other Devourer ships. They're feeding energy to the command ship's main weapon. It's almost ready to fire again." Chen nodded grimly. If the planet killer weapon fired while they were in the middle of their attack run, it would vaporize the human fleet before they could reach their target. But if they broke off now, the evacuation on the surface would fail, and 50,000 Zalani civilians would die. "Signal all ships with Prometheus weapons," she ordered. "Begin charging protocols now. We'll detonate on my mark, whether we reach the target or not." Throughout the fleet, experimental weapons that pushed the boundaries of known physics began powering up. Quantum disruptors created ripples in space-time. Gravitational pulse cannons distorted local gravity, and temporal displacement devices prepared to unleash controlled bursts of accelerated time. The combined energy buildup was so intense that it registered on sensors across the entire star system. On the surface of Zellan Prime, Captain Torres felt the ground shake as massive transport ships lifted off with loads of evacuated civilians. His rescue operation had managed to save 30,000 people so far, but 20,000 more remained scattered across the continent. The Devourer ground forces were less than an hour away from the evacuation sites. "Admiral Chen," he called through the quantum communicator, "how much time can you give us?" "Whatever it takes, Captain," came the reply. "Keep loading those ships. We'll buy you every second we can." The Devourer command ship's main weapon began to glow with malevolent energy, preparing to crack Zellan Prime like an egg. But just as it reached firing capacity, the first human ships reached ramming distance. The destroyer Phoenix, its hull glowing red-hot from enemy fire, crashed into one of the command ship's weapon arrays in a ball of nuclear fire. The explosion barely scratched the massive vessel's hull, but it disrupted the targeting systems for crucial seconds. "All ships ramming speed," Chen commanded. "For humanity, for the Zelani, for everyone who looks up at the stars and dreams of freedom." What followed was a chain reaction of sacrificial attacks that defied military logic and tactical doctrine. Human ships threw themselves against the Devourer command vessel like waves against a cliff, each impact adding to the cumulative damage. The heavy cruiser Valiant rammed the main sensor array. The carrier Indomitable crashed into the primary weapons cluster. The battleship Constitution aimed for what appeared to be the ship's central nervous system, a pulsing organic core visible through gaps in the hull plating. But it was the Defiance that delivered the killing blow. Admiral Chen ordered all remaining power to the engines as her flagship approached the Devourer command ship's core structure. Around her, the bridge crew worked with desperate efficiency, preparing the ship's experimental quantum bomb for detonation. "Prometheus weapons at maximum charge," reported the tactical officer. "Quantum cascade ready for initiation." "All remaining crew to escape pods," Chen ordered. "That's a direct command." "With respect, Admiral," replied Lieutenant Rodriguez from the sensor station. "We're staying. Someone needs to make sure this works." Chen looked around the bridge at the faces of her crew. They were young, brave, and absolutely terrified, but they hadn't wavered for an instant. She felt a surge of pride that almost overwhelmed her ability to speak. "Very well," she said simply. "Thank you for the honor of serving with you." The Defiance struck the Devourer command ship's core structure at precisely the moment that every experimental weapon in the human fleet detonated simultaneously. The explosion that followed was visible from the edge of the star system, a cascade of quantum energy that tore holes in space-time itself. For a brief moment, the laws of physics ceased to function normally in the space around the command ship. The Devourer vessel, evolved over millions of years to consume the life force of other species, had never encountered anything like the raw quantum chaos of human experimental weapons. Its biomechanical systems, designed to adapt to any threat, simply could not process the paradoxes and impossibilities unleashed by the simultaneous detonation of a dozen different reality-bending devices. The command ship began to collapse in on itself, its organic components aging to death while its mechanical parts were torn apart by gravitational anomalies. The psychic scream that emerged from its dying consciousness was heard by every sentient being in the star system, a sound of rage and incomprehension that something as young and primitive as humanity could have destroyed something so ancient and evolved. As the command ship died, the rest of the Devourer fleet began to falter. Without the hive mind intelligence that coordinated their actions, the individual ships reverted to basic survival instincts. Some attempted to flee the system while others turned on each other in feeding frenzies. The carefully orchestrated harvest of Zellan Prime collapsed into chaos. On the planet's surface, Captain Torres watched in amazement as the Devourer ground forces suddenly stopped their advance. The biomechanical constructs that had been systematically hunting down civilians began to attack each other, their hive mind connection severed by the destruction of the command ship. "All evacuation teams, this is Torres," he broadcast. "The enemy is broken. We have a window. Get those people off the planet now." The massive transport ships worked around the clock for the next 18 hours, ferrying the remaining Zilani civilians to safety aboard human vessels. By the time the last shuttle lifted off from Zalan Prime's surface, every living member of the Zilani species had been evacuated from their dying homeworld. Ambassador Kethvar stood in the observation lounge of the human transport ship Haven, looking back at the world his people had called home for thousands of years. The crystal cities were dark now, their bioluminescent forests extinguished, their floating spires crashed to the ground. But his people lived, all of them, because a species they barely knew had been willing to sacrifice everything to answer their cry for help. "Ambassador," called Captain Williams, the Haven's commanding officer, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth Command. They're offering permanent settlement rights on any human world that will accept your people. Medical care, education for your children, whatever you need to rebuild your civilization." Kethvar nodded, his large eyes still fixed on his dead homeworld. "Please send our gratitude to your leaders, Captain. But also send this message: the Zilani do not forget their debts. Humanity saved us when no one else would act. From this day forward, we are your allies, whatever the cost." 3 months later, a joint human-Zilani task force returned to Zalan Prime to study the wreckage of the Devourer fleet. What they found in the ruins of the command ship would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The Devourers had been collecting the knowledge and technology of every civilization they consumed for millions of years, and all of it was stored in quantum databases that had survived the ship's destruction. Medical advances that could extend life for centuries, agricultural techniques that could turn desert worlds into gardens, faster-than-light communications that would allow instant contact across galactic distances, energy sources that could power entire star systems. All of it was freely shared with every species in the galaxy, a gift from humanity to a cosmos that had been terrorized by the Devourers for far too long. But perhaps more important than the technology was the message that humanity's actions sent to the galaxy. For the first time in recorded history, a younger species had stood up to an ancient evil and won. Not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through courage, sacrifice, and an absolute refusal to abandon those who needed help. Within a year, dozens of species had applied to join what became known as the Terran Alliance, a mutual defense pact that promised no member world would ever again face extinction alone. The galaxy had learned that humanity, despite being relative newcomers to the interstellar community, possessed something that even the most advanced civilizations had lost over the millennia: the willingness to risk everything for strangers who had nowhere else to turn. Admiral Sarah Chen's sacrifice, and that of her entire fleet, became the founding myth of the new galactic order. Statues of the Defiance stood in the capitals of 100 worlds, and her final words were carved in stone monuments across human space. Some things are worth dying for. But the most fitting memorial to the Battle of Zalan Prime was built on New Zealand, the world that humanity had terraformed specifically for the Zilani refugees. In the center of the capital city stood a crystal spire that reached toward the stars, grown using traditional Zilani techniques but powered by human quantum technology. At night, it glowed with bioluminescent patterns that could be seen from orbit, spelling out a simple message in every known language. When they begged for help, humanity responded with total war. And in doing so, they showed the galaxy what it truly means to be alive. The Devourer threat was ended, but the legend of humanity's first great sacrifice had only just begun. Across the galaxy, in the furthest reaches of space, other ancient evils had taken notice of the young species that had destroyed their greatest nightmare. Some planned revenge, others sought alliance, but all of them had learned the same lesson. Humanity was not to be underestimated. For in answering the desperate plea of a dying species, humans had revealed the truth that would define their place in the cosmos. They were not the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. But when faced with a choice between safety and sacrifice, between self-preservation and doing what was right, humanity would always choose to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. And that, more than any weapon or technology, made them the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever seen.